And so, kind of along the same lines, then you might think, well, but it's a desert and there's no water there. So, how is there a rock sticking up? But the reason is because maybe a long time ago there was water there, but there's not anymore. So, things really, really can change for the earth because of the way that everything moves around and how everything changes so much over thousands of years.
Continuous flow of streams and wind activity cuts a plateau in such a way that from a plateau it turns into a butte. They basically look like a tower, and they are created by erosion and weathering. Buttes are found in Mexico and the southwestern side of United States. The next one is Mesa. Now Mesa is also a plateau, basically an isolated flat top elevated landform. But the only difference between a mesa and a plateau is that mesa is formed after weathering and erosion of a plateau. If I have to put it in an order, first comes a plateau, after weathering and erosion, a plateau gets converted into a mesa, and after that more and more weathering and erosion, a mesa gets converted into a butte. Weathering and erosion basically cuts the rock in a plateau and turns them into mesa and butte. Now let's see what is a canyon. First, I want you to imagine a large plateau. I've already explained how plateaus are formed. So imagine a large plateau. Now try to carve this plateau with the help of rivers and glaciers. So basically with time, the river erodes the bedrock of a plateau by cutting deep channels in the bedrock. Continuous flow of rivers and wind activity carves out a steep valley walls to form a canyon. And this kind of process takes many years. So that's how canyons are formed. By the way, canyons are formed not only by cutting a plateau. It also happens with mountains. That is how valleys are created. In a way, valleys are also like canyons. Both of them are formed through erosion, that is continuous wearing down of the land by wind and water. Now we'll see how rivers are formed. Rivers are basically water that moves from high elevation land to lower elevation land with the help of gravity. The water on the higher elevation land can come both from rain as well as melting of snow. After that, the water either gets absorbed into the ground or starts to flow where there is land depression. This kind of a downhill flow turns the water into a river and lake. Rivers eventually end up flowing into a sea or in the ocean. Along the way, it causes massive erosion and weathering of the soil, rock and sediment, which in turn changes and alters the face of a landscape. The next one is cave. Caves are formed by the dissolution of bedrock. Rainwater reacts with carbon dioxide from the air, and as it penetrates through the soil, the rainwater turns into a weak acid. Now this slowly dissolves the bedrock. A bedrock consists of alternative rocks. Somewhere you will find shale rock and then somewhere you will find sandstone. Then in between these two you will find limestone or dolomite. When rainwater penetrates to the soil, it turns into a weak acid, and it starts dissolving the bedrock by reacting with rocks like dolomite and limestone. As a result, long hollow underground caves are formed. The height of these underground caves depends on how thick the bedrock is. So every cave has an opening through which water enters. Similarly, there is also an end from where the water goes out. But there are many caves that do not have an end, because they may be still in their middle age, where the water has not eroded the rock enough to create a complete tunnel.
Okay, so next I want everybody to maybe type in the chat why or what causes all of these different geological features. Okay, we have the plateau, we have the butte, we have the mesa, we have a canyon and a cave. In general, how are they formed? What causes those geographical features? And we can pause the video here.
The next one is delta. Now this is called river delta. These are landforms created by deposition of sediment that is carried by a river. We know that when rivers flow, it carries a lot of sediments and rocks. The greater the flow, the more sediment it will carry. As soon as the flow of the river slows down, sediments in rivers get deposited. You will notice that large heavier particles like pebbles, rocks and sand are deposited first. After that, lighter material like silt and clay gets deposited. So what I'm trying to say is that you will find these deltas where the speed of the river is slow. When river starts to move slowly, that is when the sediment gets accumulated. Deltas usually occur where rivers enter an ocean, sea, estuary, lake, reservoir, etc. Apart from these places, You will find deltas at places where the river moves slowly. That's all you have to remember. In India, you will find deltas at all those places where major rivers meets the Bay of Bengal. For example, the Sundarban Delta, Godavari River Delta, Kaveri River Delta, Mahanadi River Delta, Krishna River Delta and Bhitarnika Delta. The next one is ocean. When we think about the planet Earth, we cannot forget oceans, because the reason Earth looks blue is due to the oceans. The surface of the Earth is approximately 71% water and contains 5 oceans, including the Arctic, Atlantic, Indian, Pacific and Southern. The most popular theory behind how Earth got its ocean is that the ocean was formed 4 billion years ago, with the continual degassing of the Earth's interior. We all know that the Earth was formed over 4.5 billion years ago. When the Earth was formed, it was a hot, molten rock. There was no liquid water anywhere on Earth, but the ingredients that were required for water were there. When volcanic eruptions took place, one of the gases that came out of the Earth's core was steam, which is basically water vapor. And when the planet slowly cooled, this steam or water vapor turned into clouds. Then rain began to fall and continued to fall for thousands of years. Then the water started accumulating at the lower areas of the Earth's ground, possibly creating the ocean. And then it is also believed that some of the water also came from the outer space. There are comets which are filled with water. It is said that in the beginning years, the Earth was hit with thousands of comets. And this kind of bombardment delivered half of the ocean water that we see today. The next one is peninsula. Now what is a peninsula? It is a piece of land that is surrounded by water on 3 sides, but the 4th side is connected to the mainland. For example, India is a peninsular country because it is surrounded by the Bay of Bengal in the east, Arabian Sea in the west and the Indian Ocean in the south. The 4th side is attached to a larger body of land. How are peninsulas formed? A peninsula can be formed by rising or falling of the sea level that may expose or cover portions of land to form a peninsula. Even due to tectonic activity, upliftment or falling of landmass may also help to form a peninsula. A separation of land masses over millions of years can create a peninsula. Again, a good example is the Indian subcontinent, which broke away from the ancient continent of Gondwana. The next one is isthmus. It is a narrow strip of land with sea on either side, forming a link between 2 larger areas of land. One of the most famous example of the isthmus landform is the Isthmus of Panama. The Panama Isthmus is a narrow strip of land that connects Costa Rica and Colombia. Essentially, the Isthmus of Panama connects North and South America. It is in between the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean. Now coming to its formation, an isthmus can be formed by volcanic activity, which then creates seamount, which then forms a chain of islands and block water on either side, forming an isthmus. This is how the Isthmus of Panama was formed. Another way an isthmus is formed when there is a drop in the sea level, which will then expose more land, and this is also an isthmus.
Right, so let's pause there, and we want to see what is the difference between an isthmus and a peninsula. Okay, so please go ahead and type that in the chat now. What's the difference between an isthmus and a peninsula?
The next term is marsh. It is basically a wetland. If you look at the area, it is a low-lying land which gets filled with water during rainy season or from rising water levels of a river, lake or stream. And how does a land becomes a low-lying land? Through continuous erosion processes or through deposition of sediment on nearby lands during floods. A marsh is always covered with water throughout the year. You will mostly find marshes at the edges of rivers, lakes and streams. Talking about the vegetation, these places are dominated by grass and other herbaceous plants. You will not find trees. These plant roots holds the muddy soil tightly and slows down the flow of water. This is how marshes are flooded with water all the time. Marshy area of land is also rich in biodiversity. That is why these landforms are conserved and protected throughout the world. The famous Ramsar Convention on Wetlands is a good example of what I'm saying. The next term is swamp. If you look at their locations, both are almost at a similar place, closer to a water body. So both a swamp and a marsh is a wetland. Both of them has similar characteristics in their landform. However, the only difference between a marsh and a swamp is that in a marsh area you will not find trees. You will only find grass and herbaceous plants. Whereas in a swamp, you will find trees and other woody plants. Otherwise, both of them are a low-lying land which gets filled with water during rainy season or from rising water levels of a river, lake or stream. The next one is beach. When you look at the beach, you will notice that this kind of a landform is always next to a water body, maybe a sea or an ocean. Even next to a large river, you will find a beach. On a beach, if you look at the land, you will find that it is composed of sand, rocks, shells and pebbles. Moving water constantly erodes the land and turns them into loose sand. Additionally, rivers and rainwater also erode rocks located further inland. These sediments flow through rivers and gets deposited along the coastline. When the waves of the ocean or sea continuously hits the shore, every time the wave hits the shoreline, they erode the existing sediment and rolls them over and over again. If the waves are strong, it will spread the sediment along the coastline to create a beach. By the way, the shape of the beaches keeps on changing. Tides and weather can alter beaches every day, bringing new shapes to the coastal landscape. The next one is rainforest. It can also be called a jungle. The most common meaning of a jungle is a land filled with natural vegetation and has a vast lush green cover of trees, plants, grass, herbs, shrubs, etc. Apart from natural vegetation, you will also find a variety of animal species. Most of the jungles in the world can be found in the equatorial region. In other words, tropical region. When we say tropics, it lies between the latitude lines of the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn.
So the big thing about a rainforest is that it gets a lot of rain. There's lots of rain and lots of different kinds of plants and animals. And we like to protect our rainforest as best as possible because of this, because of the many, many different kinds of plants and animals that we still actually haven't discovered all of them. There are so many tiny frogs or bacteria or types of flowers or different things that we haven't discovered yet, we haven't found yet. And when we do, a lot of times we find very interesting technologies, and a lot of them are used for medicines. So we don't want to destroy our rainforests because they are actually what gives us new technologies and new medicine.
The next one is plain. A plain is a broad area of flat land. Plains are one of the major landforms on Earth. Plains form in many different ways.
Right, some interesting things about plains. There are different kinds, all right? So in the United States, we have, for example, in Texas, you look outside, okay? A lot of times it doesn't take very long if you go out and dig in the ground. You'll just have a very small amount of dirt, okay? I was recently in Kansas and walking around and going hiking, and there's all kinds of grass. It's a very beautiful grass plain. But you look down and it's got really dark soil. When you have dark soil, that means it's very good soil. It can hold has lots of nutrients and is really good for farming. However, it's very, very thin. So the soil is about like this, and then there's a bunch of rocks. Well, when a plant grows, like for example, a piece of corn, okay, if corn grows this high, so it's taller than, maybe about the size of students or taller than you. It needs to have roots that go down about as much, if not deeper. Okay, so if you have soil that's this deep, you can't grow much more than grass. So those areas is actually very difficult to go farming, but you can compare that to Illinois, where I'm from, where the dirt goes very, very deep. Another thing about that is that, like around here, people don't have very many basements in their house because the dirt is so thin. Right? The rocks are too hard, they can't dig. So, but where I'm from in Illinois, almost everybody has a basement in their house because there's so much dirt that we can dig down in it. Okay, and why is there so much dirt in Illinois and in that part of the country? Well, it's because of glaciers. Okay, so type in the chat, remind everybody, what is a glacier? Let's take a look at that, please. What is a glacier? We talked about them earlier. Okay, so remember what a glacier is now? So that glacier pushed all this dirt along with it because it moved and moved and moved. And because of that, over a long time, that dirt built up. And there it is. It's now Illinois and other parts of the Midwest, Indiana, Iowa, and whatnot, have very good soil for growing almost anything.
The next one is prairie. Prairies are basically flat, fertile lands dominated by grasses. You can also call them grasslands. You will find very few trees. Now, grasslands are known by different names in different parts of the world. In Asia and Europe, it is called steppes or taiga. In North America, it is called prairies. In South America, it is called pampas, llanos and cerrados. In Africa, they are called savannas and velds. And in Australia, they are called rangelands or downs. The grasses of these grasslands hold the soil firmly in its place. That is why erosion is very minimal. Majority of the grasslands around the world are found between 40° and 60° north and south of the equator. That means you will find the grassland in temperate zone. The next one is valley. Valleys are one of the most common landforms on the earth, and they are formed through erosion or the gradual wearing down of the land by wind and water. In river valleys, for example, the river acts as an erosional agent by grinding down the rock or soil and creating a valley in between the mountains and hills. Valleys are usually in the form of U and V shape. Rivers and streams do most of the work in carving hills and mountain slopes to form valley, hence forming a landform that looks like the letter V. Even glaciers do the same work, what rivers and streams do. As the glaciers move, they grind the valley floor and carve it in the form of letter U. When the glacier melts, a U-shaped valley marks the spot where the snow and ice once flowed. In India, you will find many V-shaped valleys in the northern states and northeastern states. In these places, most of the V-shaped valley are found in the lower and middle ranges of Himalayas, because the upper Himalayas or the greater Himalayan ranges have glaciers. And I already told you that with glaciers, you will find a U-shaped valley. Apart from north and northeast India, you will also find mountains in central as well as southern part of India. Since there is no ice or glacier in lower latitudes of India, naturally you will find V-shaped valleys. The next one is hill. We have already covered how mountains are formed. Plus, there is no actual difference between hills and mountains. The only difference you can see is the height. Hills are not as high as mountains. Hills can be both natural as well as man-made. Suppose if you dump piles of sand, mud or earth material at one place, eventually it will turn into a huge stack, which is also a hill. It is actually called a mound. But when we talk about natural hills, they are formed by different types of geologic activity. One is faulting. A fault lies at the major boundaries between Earth's tectonic plates. These Earth's tectonic plates are constantly moving and changing the landscape. The Himalayas are a good example. They were once tiny hills. The Himalayas continues to grow because of faulting activity beneath the Earth's surface. Hills can be created by erosion. A mountain which is bigger than a hill, it can be worn down by erosion. What I'm trying to say is, hills may have once been mountains that were worn down by erosion over many thousands of years.
And so this is what we were talking about before, about how the Rocky Mountains are new and they're very pointy, and the Appalachian Mountains, the ones on the east side of the country, are, I guess, east for you guys, is actually they're older mountains because they're round, okay? Because they used to be very pointy and they're old, and the rain and everything has made them more round or softer.
The next one is basin. When you look at a basin, basically it is a depression or a dip in the Earth's surface. When you look at the shape, it looks like a ball and its sides are higher than the bottom. They are also in oval and circular in shape, similar to a sink or a tub you might have seen in your bathroom. Some basins are filled with water, and then there are ones that are empty. They are formed over thousands of years or almost overnight. If it is through erosion, when a ground gets eroded, it takes thousands of years.
All right, and this is a different day for me, but it's the same day for you, obviously. But anyway, thank you so much for watching the video. At this time, you need to make sure that you have completed your sheet of all the different vocabulary words. So if you haven't filled in all of them, you can raise your hand on Zoom and ask your teacher. Or if you're doing asynchronous, or even if you aren't, you can still go back and watch the video, jump through it, and fill in the parts that you missed. Like I said, they're pretty much in order, so you can try to find based on that in the video. Also, you need to work on learning these terms because we're going to be using them throughout the entire year. Make sure you get ready for your continents and oceans quiz, which will be coming up soon. All right, thanks a lot for watching. Please ask your teacher if you have any questions.